Welcome to Speaking Opera. This is a podcast about opera in many different areas of life. Opera can be found in the Opera House, out in various theaters and film, and also in the special place we're going to talk about today, one of the treasures of this country and every country, the library. And so we'll talk about opera in the library. And I have a special guest today who knows more about libraries than I would ever be able to even start to tell you. A wonderful person who has been very helpful in the Opera Club here in Wakefield and is the director in the Lucius Beebe Memorial Library in Wakefield, Catherine McDonald, who's the director there. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I was so glad when you asked me to talk about this. I think it's an interesting topic, and it's such a great contribution to have the Opera Club at the library. So this was fun. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you. Well, welcome. And I'm looking forward to talking about the library itself. So perhaps I can ask you first, the library is celebrating its centennial this year at the Lucius Beebe Memorial Library. Can you tell us a bit about that in the library?
I can tell you a little bit. So what we're celebrating as the centennial is the building itself, the Main Street building. Mm-hmm. So the library was founded by a group of gentlemen, including Lucius Beebe, in 1856. And the building on Main Street was built by the Beebe children in honor of their father in 1922. And it opened in 1923. And it's a beautiful, beautiful building, and we encourage everybody to come down and check it out and use it. It was restored in the late 90s, and it's much of the original parts of the building are still there. So we'll be celebrating for the full year right through 23, April of 23. And there's lots of displays about the history of the building in the building. So if you come in, you can see a little bit more about what happened and how it came to be.
Wonderful. Can you mention the website for us if people who are listening or watching would like to check that out? And to look at the website, because it's beautifully done.
We're going to have a timeline on the website, too, and a lot of archival material will be on the website, so you can check that out. It's wakefieldlibrary.org. So it's www.wakefieldlibrary.org.
Right. I think people should really check that out. There are some beautiful photographs in there, and some of the photographs of the original library, right? From all the way through and how it's changed.
Yes.
And we use the lecture hall for the Opera Club, but there are many, many special rooms in there. One, I wrote my senior theme in upstairs in 19-something or other, 1963. It's the room, if you're walking into the library on the left, which is now called...
So it's now the red... Is it now the red room or the gold room?
That's the room that's not the very ornate room with the fireplace. Oh, they both have fireplaces.
They both are, yeah.
Okay.
So the red room is the quiet reading room, and it's red. Right. With the fireplace. It's quite beautiful. Mm-hmm. And then on the left, as you enter, what we call the gold room is actually called the living room. It was originally the children's room.
That was that's very interesting. I remember it in the 60s, and I wrote my senior theme in there. And believe it or not, this is true, they had not created whiteout yet. There was whiteout hadn't been invented yet. No. And wow. I know did some research on that, and I had typed up my senior theme, and I wasn't a very good typist, but I kept typing it up, and I got it right eventually. But I remembered that room very fondly because that's where I studied in my high school days. It's a beautiful place.
Beautiful space.
So now I ask you a question that I'm curious about, because you've spoken about this in bits and pieces before to me, and I was very fascinated by this, which is, what are the main purposes of a public library, and how have they changed throughout the years?
Yeah, it is an interesting question. So I think when you think about libraries going as far back as you want, the basic foundation has always been access. Whatever was of value that people needed access to, a library would provide that. So maybe it's books that you couldn't take from the shelf. Maybe you had to pay to belong to it. But the idea has always been access. And then when you look at what happened in the United States, democracy really was dependent upon an educated populace. So public libraries go. I think the first one goes back to Ben Franklin. Oh. And the idea of a library where people would have access to information. From that point on, it changed with what people needed. And so whatever is seen of being the thing of value and the thing that will help society, that's what the library will provide and will be for in its given time period. Most recently, there is a man who did some studies on library use and what libraries were for. And in the Carnegie years, you may have heard of Carnegie libraries. Sure. Melrose is a Carnegie library. So Andrew Carnegie thought that the idea behind libraries was to level the playing field, to give people access to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite library stories, and I don't know if you knew this, but Ernest and Julio Gallo got their wine recipe from the public library.
That's very interesting.
And in 1933, at the end of Prohibition, which kind of helped out. And their first year, they made $30,000, and it was from they had been their parents had died, and they were in trouble, and they got this recipe from the public library in Modesto, California. So there's, it's a place of possibility. Now, most recently, what they've discovered is that libraries are really places of like community centers. They're places where people will go to be with other people or to learn new things, or to just be exposed to new things, or to find things about your community, find out information about your community. So the progression has sort of been naturally access. And of course, access and education, the foundation of that has always been literacy and reading. You read to learn and you read to understand. So there's always been a book thing there. But it's not just about the books. It's more about the access and the information and the understanding. And now it's community.
So the Wakefield Library itself, since I've moved back here, and it's now 11 years ago, has changed. You've added rooms. There are various things have happened within the library that have expanded it and changed it on some level. Have electronics changed it at all? Do you think?
Sure.
That's a loaded question.
Sure, right. Yeah. I was not in Wakefield when. So I know the library from 2000. By the time I came on the scene, a lot of the spaces had already been fixed, and there's not really any room to grow there. But everything does evolve and change. And probably the most noticeable change is that all the reference materials, there were rows and rows of reference shelving. And all that information is online now, and it's updated so quickly that we don't use the books anymore. So now those areas are seating areas. We try to make some study space. We're constantly looking at what people need and trying to adapt to the space for those purposes. It isn't always easy because there's not a lot of space there. One of the things we know people really need private spaces to, do a podcast or take a Zoom meeting or be on the phone. And we really don't have a space that lends itself to that. And we're trying to figure out how will we do that, because there's a real need in town for that. So that's a little bit of the evolution of it.
I'm seeing some of it as every once in a while I go to the library and something's been moved around. Of course, I'm a creature of habit, so I'm used to going to the same place to look for the mysteries or whatever that might be that I'm checking out. And the library is beautifully done. I think people will be doing themselves a service by looking on the website. When I'm outside of Wakefield in social situations, the library is mentioned quite often because it is quite a gem in its way. It really is. It's a beautiful building and it's very well run. I do want to say something about the Opera Club. When I came back, I came back about 11 years ago to Wakefield, where I grew up. I grew up here after many years, 36 years in Manhattan in New York City, which taught me not to be as shy as I used to be. That's an understatement, but I was very shy as a child. I know it's hard to believe. Manhattan does a lot of things, but I was glad to be there, and it was wonderful, and it was time to come back. And I am amazed at the Opera Club because I always joke about this because I really was trying to find a place to be. I was already in an age where I wanted to still feel useful, and I wanted to share things with people and become a part of something, not run it. I've never thought of myself as someone in charge. I really don't want to do that, but to share. And I thought about an opera club, and I thought, well, maybe 4 or 5 people will come and we'll play some CDs and it'll be nice. So I came to, at that time I was talking to the former director, and you were there. And you were very encouraging, I must say. You were very nice to me. And that made me feel good. And I thought, well, why not? So I filled out the paperwork and we started the Opera Club, which has been quite amazing. And I believe, from what I understand from friends of mine who are librarians in other towns and cities, is that we're one of the only opera clubs in the whole area of north of Boston that I know of. There's an opera club in Boston, but it's not in a library. And although they occasionally have a program centered around opera, maybe they'll have one featured day or something, with someone presenting a program on opera. They don't have an opera club. So I think we're unique in that way. What amazes me is how many people show up. I'm always amazed. When it first started, I thought, well, a few people will drop by and it'll be okay. And we have an initial core of people that have never stopped coming. And right after COVID, I was totally amazed at the amount of people that was just so loyal to the Opera Club, and we're hungry to hear more music. I do want to acknowledge the fact that the library has given us a brand new audio-video system, which has been a huge change up, really a change up. It is so much better. It's really like being in a small theater now. It really, I think it has encouraged a lot of people. One thing I wanted to mention about libraries and opera that was a very big surprise to me, and something I wanted to try, because I was in the library and I had ordered this book, Verdi Shakespeare, and Verdi wrote 3 operas based on Shakespearean plays. He loved Shakespeare, and he knew Shakespeare through a kind of an Italian translation that wasn't true to the English at that time, but he loved the plays, and he used to go to them. He was very drawn to Macbeth, Othello, and The Merry Wives of Windsor, which is Falstaff. And I tried something that I thought, I've tried a lot of different things and thought people will still keep coming, hopefully. And I took 4 scenes from Shakespearean plays with Judi Dench and Ian Richardson. And I found 4 performances on operatic performances in Italian, live performances. And it took me a long, long time to do this, and with some help from here at WCAT, I was able to do 4 scenes. And so I played Judi Dench reading the letter from Macbeth in the beginning. Then I played right after it the scene from the opera with Lady Macbeth singing her aria. And he stuck very close throughout the opera to the original translation. It took him a long, long time to do that opera because he wanted it to be very, very close to the play. And he made one adjustment that he did later on, but it's basically right to the Shakespearean play. And I thought, I wonder if this is going to fly. I think this is really, I'm not sure. And I never have received as many emails ever as I have at that. I can't tell you how many I got. I would say over half the people in the group sent me an email about how much they loved it. So you never know what'll work and what won't work. And they love the idea of seeing that. So I'll do some other programs like that.
So we had talked about the Opera Club at the library and how, and I've been giving it a lot of thought, because it was very successful. You originally started it on your own, just, it's not renting it because we don't pay anything. Everything's free. But you reserved the lecture hall on your own time and on your own. And we soon discovered that there was a need for it. And so we figured out that we should partner in some way because this was fulfilling a definite need. And the equipment to enhance that all comes from donations. So donations that people give gives us an opportunity to really meet these needs that we discover. That would be a capital project. And it would be years before we'd be able to manage to get that. So the gifts are incredibly helpful. But the thing about the Opera Club, as I thought about it, what made that? Why do some things take and other things, maybe not so much or whatever? But from my perspective, what I've seen of you and opera is that incredible passion, the unbelievable amount of knowledge that just comes from interest. You have a whole life story background that comes through, your enjoyment of it from when you were a child with your family members and all of that comes through. So number one, you've got this person with a real passion, and that word is so overused now, but yeah, you just have a passion for this music. And what the library offers, what I think is perfect, is a totally free, no judgment zone. There's no cost. There's no, I wrote this down because I was thinking about it. There's no need to declare your intention. When you go to the library and you're gonna go to the Opera Club, you don't have to be a member. You don't have to say, I want to do this because, or you don't have to declare how much you know or how little you know. You don't have to say anything. It's just so easy. It's such an easy place to be. And so you go, and maybe it doesn't work out for you. Maybe you don't like it. You haven't lost anything but your time. And 9 times out of 10, it's so comfortable that, and you don't have to make a commitment. You can drop in whenever you want. Mm-hmm. So it's such an easy way to learn something that it's just at the heart of it, it's just really enjoyable. And I think also part of it is that you make it so enjoyable because you have that passion for it. And so I'm not surprised that we're one of the few places that have it. I know we're one of the few places that have a French club. And it's pretty much the same thing. There's a group of people with a passion for all things French. And they have met other people with a similar desire to keep that going, to do that kind of weekly. So, the fact that Wakefield has this spot where people, anybody who has an interest can use that spot and let other people know, here I am. If you're interested, come hang out with us. And you can take risks as the moderator and as the presenter. You can take all kinds of risks. And people are so forgiving. I've worked in the youth room. I know nothing about children's librarianship, and I've covered the youth room and been able to say to people, I'll help you, but I have to let you know that I don't really know what I'm doing. And no one cares. All they care is that you're helping them. All they care is that it's a great day and everybody's happy, and you're going to explore it together. That seems to be the more important part of it. So I think you've filled a niche, and it was the right place at the right time. I know you've mentioned like there's husband-wife teams who come in.
Yeah.
How easy is it to say to your husband, you think you don't like this, let's go down to Main Street and check it out. If you don't like it, you can go upstairs and find a magazine or something. You don't have to. It's no judgments, no risk, really easy. And then they get down there and it's fun. And they come back.
It's strange you would mention that. I love that. I don't want to disclose too many things because people say things to me that are obviously very personal sometimes as far as something that moves them emotionally, but they don't want to say it within the group. But sometimes they do too. I had a man said this. I hope he's watching this because they're very nice. They're fairly new. That they are a married couple. And he asked me the most loaded, wonderful question. I thought, I need to free myself of baggage. I love this question. He said, my wife loves opera, and I think I do too. He said, I liked being here today, but he said, I like listening to the opera with my eyes closed and rather than watching it. I know you have the subtitles, but, the words, he said. So I said, whatever works for you. He said, I said, there are people that go to the opera and sleep through the whole thing. I don't know. Everyone has their own experience. Some people are tired and they may even take a snooze during the opera, like in the Carmen, when they have the dialogue, when they do the spoken word dialogue. People will snooze in between, that kind of thing. I said, whatever you like. He said, I really love it. He said, but I like it with my eyes. I said, it's perfect. You get 100%. And that's exactly what you're talking about. Everyone has a different reason for coming. And many times it's because of their parents and their grandparents loved opera and they heard it as children and they were busy raising their children and they didn't have a chance to listen to the opera. When I was 15, there was a boy who wanted to date my sister. She wasn't interested. But he told me, trying to get friendly with me, he said, this is the kind of thing, this is for another time, but he said, I like opera, but don't tell anyone. He was a jock. He played baseball, he said, and he thought, this was in 1960 something or other. And he didn't want people in high school to know that he liked opera because that was not cool, that kind of thing. So opera has a very strange kind of, it draws people in that are fanatics like myself who just love it and other people who give it a shot. And I always hope that people will come and try once and see how they feel about it, because it's about feelings. It's about the experience you have when you're listening to the music. Sometimes it's harder for some people than others to relate to the opera. I think it's changing, though. I really do.
Well, that's where I think your passion for it comes in, and your storytelling and everything, where all that comes in. Mm-hmm. It's not uncommon for me to read a book that my sister is reading, and I won't like it, and I won't finish it. And then we'll have a conversation, and she'll talk to me about it in a way that I didn't experience it at all. That character was supposed to be funny, and I didn't see that. Or there was some depth to it that I didn't get, and she did. And I'll go back, and it's a different experience. And I think there are lots of things like opera and foreign languages and travel, history, geography, that can be complicated or not. And sometimes you just need someone to show you in a new way that you didn't experience on your own, to bring you to a new place with it, to discover maybe that is something that I like. And maybe that's like other things that I like, and I never made the connection before.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's all about making connections. And that's something that I think you excel at, bringing people. And to be honest, I have never even been to one of your meetings, but we've had conversations.
We're waiting.
I know. I keep saying I'll do it.
On a Saturday afternoon, I'm sure you're...
Because when you talked about being a kid and being 15 and it wasn't the cool thing,
Mm-hmm.
all that I know about opera is from my uncle, and I told you this, who was a truck driver.
Mm-hmm.
And he was an athlete, and he was my father's older brother, and he was, you know, a man's man.
Right.
He was a drinker and a truck driver and a very handsome, and loved opera, and would cry,
Mm-hmm.
you know, play his favorite arias. And there's so much more to the world than to label something, you know.
You just really hit an emotional. I had an emotional experience with that. I thought how wonderful it is when you get someone who comes in. Somebody a few years ago who lost his wife, and he said, "I'm really not into opera, but my wife liked it, and I'm coming because it reminds me of her." Even talking about it, my eyes are getting wet. I can feel it. And I thought, if I never hear anything from anyone else again in the whole of my life, my whole life, that is enough for me to do this. And I feel close to my wife. It's as if she is here, and he comes. And everybody has a different reason for liking things and not liking things. And I think opera is not as foreign as people think it is. And although I won't take a stance on this, but groups like Il Voglio and Bocelli, who really has sung almost no operas live ever, only a couple, and didn't really fare well with that, but he's hugely popular. Andrea Bocelli, Pavarotti, the three tenors, those are all helpful. All of it's helpful. If they play Philadelphia, the film Philadelphia, they played Maria Callas singing La Mama Morta. If somebody hears that one thing, do you remember the wonderful film with Cher, Moonstruck? That is, if you don't like opera, give it to a friend and say, watch this. And when they're in that scene in the opera, when the music is La Bohème and they're touching each other's hands, and it's like, this is the way to introduce opera to people, not to make them sit through a 5-hour opera that they're not going to relate to. Also choosing the right opera if you're sending someone to see the opera. But I've had amazing things happen at the Opera Club, and I always like to save things. When I know something's going to be a little dry, I always like to have a sort of like, many of the great composers said, you have to save all the great music to the end of the opera. That isn't always true, but often, certainly in something like Götterdämmerung or these operas with these big dramatic endings, but that's what people leave. And I thought so clearly, just before we took our break in June, I wanted to end it on a happy note. I thought, opera has a lot of not always good things happening in it. Oftentimes, like in Tosca, everybody's dead at the end, except the conductor. Right. But I played Frederica von Stade singing from the Cenerentola, from the story of Cinderella that was written by Rossini. And at the end, she forgives everyone. They don't have a stepmother, they have a stepfather. And it's a little different, but it's the story of Cinderella. And I played the final scene. It was such a good call. I could tell by people's faces. And she's singing, and she sings so beautifully. It's a movie by Pinnell, actually, Jean-Pierre Pinnell. And she said, we need to find forgiveness. She forgives her sisters and let us all be joyous together. And she's got her man, she's got the prince, right? Everything's good. And it's very uplifting. And I thought, I want to leave this on an uplifting note. So when I do the programs, I think about your uncle, the guy that I mentioned that when I was a kid who liked opera, didn't want to tell anyone. And various people in their lives have told me stories about why they love opera, and I try to include that in the programs. How were you introduced to opera through your uncle?
I guess that's pretty much. My uncle was much older than my father, and he and my aunt had taken my father to an opera. And I don't know what opera it was, but after he passed away, they heard it on the radio. And it was I don't know, it was NPR or something. It was unexpected. They weren't listening to an opera channel. It was unexpected. And his wife called my father and said, I just heard this do you remember that we went? And I think maybe it was the only time that he had been to the opera. But he listened to the records at my uncle's house. He had a rec room, like a 70s rec room. Must have been the 60s and the 70s. And they would just listen to the albums that were there and talk about it a little bit. The stories, the stories are so rich. The Italian, they would talk about the Italian. There's just so much about it. But we did not have a stereo until I was in high school, probably junior high or high school. So it was mostly just the radio that we listened to. But both of my parents were very into the arts.
They were.
And I'll say this too, a lot of it came from public libraries and public performances. The symphony would play on the Esplanade. And, they didn't have the means to actually go to some of these get these expensive tickets or anything. But they used to say being in Boston is a real advantage because there's so much that's available to everyone if you just look for it. You just have to kind of look for it. So as a librarian, I kind of keep that in mind and think about what can we make sure people have access to. You have Plaza Jazz, you have things like the Opera.
That's a great show.
You have things like the Opera Club, and it exposes people to something new. And there are all different forms of art, and there are all different ways to experience the world. Yeah, it's all about the feeling.
Absolutely.
So much of it's about the feeling.
Absolutely. That's what opera is. If there's an area that it can enrich a person's life, even on your own. During the COVID, I played one opera a day for the 2 years. And I played a lot of things I hadn't played. And I played an opera by Charles Gounod, which I really didn't know, called Cinq-Mars. My French is bad. And it was about a person who was a person during the time of Cardinal Richelieu and Louis XIII, and he tried to, in some way, get rid of Richelieu, try to kill him. And this is apparently a true story. Did you know about him? I didn't either. I didn't have a clue. I'm thinking, where do these things come from? Don't quote me, but I think it's based on a true person, a person who really was. It's like Cinq-Mars, like M-A-R-S, Cinq-Mars. Yeah.
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, it's an opera. There's only one recording available. It's hard to get. And it was written by Charles Gounod, who wrote Faust. But it's an interesting story. And it's about Richelieu and trying to kill him, to get rid of him. And Cinq-Mars, like in many operas, dies. So somebody oftentimes dies, but they don't always die for bad reason. In opera, that could be the sacrifice and the elevation of the greater good, or the greater love, I should say. I don't even think that was wrong good. It's the greater love that somebody has when you sacrifice. Like in Traviata, I mentioned this at one of the other podcasts. I will do something today that my friends are all sending me funny emails on the side because I haven't mentioned Maria Callas in any podcast yet. And really? They're all sending me like, what's happening? Is there something wrong with you? Because I have a Callas. I would say safely I adore Maria Callas. And interestingly, in the library, when we do, we usually do a December program, as we will this year, on La Divina, Maria Callas. It's one of the largest attended opera club meetings of the year. She still carries this kind of mystique. In the approach, I'm doing the backwards, that'll be December 17th. The approach that I took last year, which was hugely popular, I must say, and I was very happy to do it, and it was a joy, is that I mixed her life in with her singing and talked about the things in her life that were less than ideal. And she often said, I don't have the quote in front of me, but she often felt like Maria was one person and Carlos was the other. And that sometimes, in the quote, she said, sometimes she feels like she's outside of herself looking in at herself. And I think that was part of the complexity of her life, was the fact that she was so complex as a person and had a very, very difficult life in the early years of her life, especially. But anyway, that'll be in December. I think this is an interesting fall grouping. We're starting with the first in September 24th will be The Many Faces of Carmen, Bizet's Carmen. 4 acts in Carmen. Carmen is sung either by a soprano or a mezzo-soprano, occasionally by contralto, but very seldom. But there are 4 acts in Carmen, and what we'll have is a scene from each of the 4 acts with 4 different singers, 4 different women playing Carmen in 4 different productions. I think it'll be very interesting, and they are very different. So it'll show, first of all, of course, the voices and the physical beings will be different. But beyond that, it'll be approaches, and they'll all be in the French, sung in French. But there'll be 4 very different approaches to Carmen. And I've done a lot of research on this because some are similar to others and some are very, very different, the approaches. And Carmen is just an opera that people love. I'll probably make a few minutes when I say this, but Don Jose, who's the tenor, some people say, oh, it's all about Don Jose. No, it's not all about Don Jose. It's all about Carmen. Bizet would not have written all of the main meaty music for her if he wanted it to be focused on Don Jose. That's a nice thing. And if you like the tenors, and you might want to go there. I'm going down a slippery slope here, I think. But anyway, Carmen is a wonderful opera that many, many people love. And I think that should hopefully be very enjoyable. Then in October, we've always done, it's Italian Heritage Month.
Right.
So we always do Italian operas from scenes and arias from Italian operas, and will be with English subtitles. And we have a guest who will be with us for that month, Bill DePeter, who's done a group of, actually he helped me with the first opera club meeting we ever had in 2016, January 2016. And he'll do half of the program and I'll do half of the program. There will be subtitles and it should be fun. Then I've dug up a thought and I'm left to my own devices. Opera luminaries born in Massachusetts.
Is this November?
November. And I did find out about the date thing, so we're okay. It's surprising some of the people. Now, it's luminaries, so I am going to make it easy for myself and choose Leonard Bernstein, of course, was born in Massachusetts. But the rest are all singers. And one of them, strangely enough, there's been almost nothing done that I know of. I hope people correct me if you hear me say this or see me say this, and I'm not correct, please let me know. But she was born in Melrose, Massachusetts. Geraldine Farrar. She sang at the Met. She was enormously popular. There was the Jerry Flappers, where women used to dress like her. She was very beautiful. She was oftentimes the soprano to Enrico Caruso's performances of various operas.
So what year are we talking about? Years?
What year was she born?
Or when was she active?
Oh, she was active at the Metropolitan in the like 1910, in 20ish in that area. I can't say exactly, to be honest with you.
But born in Melrose.
Born in Melrose.
Wow.
I was not born in the same year, but I was born in Melrose also. But she's hugely popular, and there have been books written about her. I'm really kind of curious why more hasn't been done. Her main career was at the Metropolitan Opera, and Caruso, they sang together many, many times. So there are recordings of her. So
wow.
Recordings she made. So I'll be able to, those will be of limited, the sonics will be of a mixed bag, but they'll be fine. And she's very interesting as a woman. And she did write a book, which I just finished reading. No problems with narcissism there. She writes about it beautifully. But she had a huge career, especially her early years when she left Melrose and she studied Europe. She ended up having her early main career was in Germany. It's interesting. Then she came back. But her big career at the Met, she was extremely popular, very popular.
Wow.
Yeah. And there are 78s of her, no complete recordings, but she recorded quite a bit. So Geraldine Farrar and some other singers and people that have been in some ways connected with opera. So actually, I should say other singers. So that'll be November, and then we'll do the Maria Callas in December.
So when you do this, when you put all this work into this, you're often discovering new things yourself.
You know me so well. That's why I chose it. Actually, I chose the luminaries. I work with Jim Sellers, who does the artwork for us, which is beautiful. And actually, a number of people that work at the library have commented on how beautiful the artwork is, and it is.
And it really evokes opera.
It does.
Yeah.
We've been friends for over 50 years. I met him in a record store years ago. We stayed friends when I was living in Boston. I was actually working in the record store. That's the hardest one, and I choose things that are difficult because it's exactly what you just said. If it were easy, it wouldn't be fun. When people ask me the amount of time put into these programs, it's substantial. And I often come and check the sound and make sure things are okay and all of that. But I love the challenge. For me, it's fun. It really is, because I'm doing what I love. And if you do what you love, then all is good. And I love doing this. I feel very satisfied, of course, because the human condition keeps me in a certain place. It's never good enough. And they remind me at WCAT quite often that it's good enough and stop. It's good, stop. What is that about? That's old stuff. And I found through various therapies that you can turn that down, the volume, but you can never take the knob out of the message. So if you have this message of it's never good enough, you can never remove it completely, but you learn how to turn it down. And you learn how to do things like what I'm talking about so that it's more than a bandage. It actually makes things better. And you realize you're getting better. Or I'm getting better when I'm doing it. So the challenge is fun. And when I look at some of the faces, and I try not to say this, I shouldn't be saying it here even, but when I see people's faces in the opera club, and it works. I mean, some of the people clearly are like just totally taken to another place. It's quite wonderful. It's all worth it, every bit of it. I love it. I love doing the podcast. I have some things lined up for interviewing some singers again. On my website, I have a number of interviews that I did. I just banged the table. I think I'll leave that in there. Because Ryan told me not to. I had to do it. No. Some interviews that I did in the 1980s on the radio when I was living in New York, and I put them on my website. So day by day.
So I hope lots of people listen to this and come down and sooner or later it's in the library building. I'm going to put down to that room.
Should I hold it?
It's always a Saturday,
It's
right?
always on a Saturday. And I realize
what time of day?
It's actually the time really works well. We took in the beginning, for the first 4 or 5 months, I kept asking, I would pass out a survey each week and ask people to check off certain things. And Saturday seemed to be the best day. Sunday was out because it's a quiet day and we weren't sure which month, now we're not doing July and August, so that it solves that problem. But 2 to 3:30 is the basic time, and it can fluctuate slightly one way or the other. If I think that we're going to run out of time and it's going to be really, really rushed, then I try to choose things that fit into the slot And if they don't, then I let people know in the beginning we might be running over by 15 minutes because of the musical selections. And everyone stays. No one's ever left, so I guess it's okay. So it's 2 to 3:30. Which one are you coming to?
I'll shoot for September, and then if that doesn't work, I'll go to October. And if that doesn't work,
Carmen will be fun.
Yeah,
I think that actually should be a lot of fun.
Carmen sounded appealing to me. That sounds appealing to me, to compare and contrast. And probably people like that one because it's part of popular culture. So to the idea that different people have approached that role differently, that's appealing to me.
I'm already auditioning different performances because I really want them to have a major contrast between them. And there are lots of wonderful singers that have sung harp, and there's a lot to choose from. Having English subtitles is harder. If it's earlier on, they didn't do that, and usually there aren't subtitles, so we have to it depends on what it is. And if you're doing audio, it's different because you can print out the program. So when I was in my junior year in high school, I was taking the college course, and I had one of the electives, I think, was music theory and harmony. And the teacher said to me, "I know you like opera because I've talked to one of the other teachers in the school. She was my French teacher, Lenore Padula. And he said, I would like you to present," I'm not sure what word he actually used, but something of Carmen. And I said, "Me?" I was so shy. I'm thinking about it now. I can still remember this clearly. So I was 17, and I had, believe it or not, they used to do complete operas on 45 RPMs years ago. Very few, but I had bought them at Woolworths with my lunch money. Because I worked part-time, here and there doing whatever, but I bought all opera. I would make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and save all the money to buy opera records with. And so I brought my Carmen with Risa Stevens and Jan Pierce and Reiner conducting, and I played it, and he looked at me afterwards. I'll never forget this, how some things just stay with you. He said, "You'll do this again someday." I said, "Oh, okay." And those memories came back to me recently when I was in New York in the 1980s, and I was doing radio programs. I thought, oh, I am doing it again. So never say never. I can truthfully say now that I'm in my 8th decade of life, you should never say never, mostly, right? Because you think, for myself, I often think, oh, I'm not going to do that. And then I think, oh, I even like doing this. So maybe it's like going to an opera. So people try it one time, go because you're curious, or now with the streaming, you can watch it for free on television all the time.
Yeah.
TV.
Streaming has changed a lot.
I find that many of the people in our group, not all of them, but some of them do the streaming, but it's interesting. Not everybody does streaming. We have some members who come every month who don't do streaming. So they watch them if they're programmed on PBS. Sometimes they're programmed on PBS and but the streaming, some of it you have to pay for. So you can get them out on demand and that kind of thing. But I think this is for another time, but people being together, enjoying this, it's not the same as sitting in your living room watching something on television by yourself. It's not the same experience at all. You can't.
Well, we found that during the pandemic, that as much as you can do at home,
absolutely,
there are some things and you have Zoom, but it's still not exactly the same. And like I said, with the story with reading with my sister, sometimes the person next to you makes a comment that changes your whole outlook on something.
Absolutely.
So, the connections that you make in real life, I can see how that would make a difference. But there's probably a place for everything. There's the streaming works, the on-site works, and all together you have a very rich pot of choices.
Mm-hmm.
and different ways to understand it and experience it. We're constantly looking at formats. And, you know, I think all the time, will people stream? Because if everyone moves to streaming, what will happen to CDs and DVDs? And will we no longer have to have those hard formats? Mm-hmm. That frees up space. It changes all kinds of things. So we're always watching, you know, how do people do that? But I know not everyone streams yet. And it's not convenient for everyone, and it's, you know, it doesn't work, but more and more people are.
There are collectors. Yeah. When I worked in the music business years ago, and Napster came along, I had my own business, which that ended all of that. And in a lot of ways it was meant to be. I went back to school in my 50s. But I was like, oh, this is done. I'm out. I had learned by that time. I was not the fool. I was like, this is over. So I think that even though people often will say, oh, but they're making records, it's a tiny, tiny group of people that are buying records, that are collectors that want the vinyl, and even CDs. A lot of music is coming out now only on electronically. And so you can buy the music electronically, but they're not doing CDs anymore, or they're not doing LPs at all anymore. Those are collectibles at this point, I think. I have a friend who's collecting them. They're expensive, and they really only do what they think will sell. So if you're really collecting, you know, you might have to have all of it, like I do. Don't ask.
Your own personal library.
I have boxes that have words on them that are in the closet that I'm not going anywhere near from New York days. And one day when I'm ready, you know, you save, at some point when you go to a lot in the theater and you say all the brochures and all of this and that, and you think, what am I going to do? Then you think, oh, you know, one side of the mind says, throw it out. You're never going to look at it again. The other side says, when you open the box, oh, I'm so glad I kept this. It reminds me of something special. I went to see Twiggy in my one and only, and she was incredible. It's something I never have thought of. And I thought, seeing her live, she was like amazing. Do you remember her, Twiggy?
Oh, sure.
She was incredible.
Yeah.
And Tommy Tune. And then I think, well, not today. I'll leave it in the box.
That's a clutter program. That's a whole other program.
I'm not a clutterer, thank God, except for CDs.
All about stuff.
So you have a clutter program in the...
There are all kinds of books on clutter now, and there's Marie Kondo's, you know, her way of decluttering is very popular. Swedish death cleaning. So
there's... I shouldn't send it. Again, I probably will regret saying this, and I might cut it out. So when people have I have a huge, large, and nothing like some of my friends' CD collection, like a whole wall of CDs, floor to ceiling. And one day I was sitting with one of my closest friends, and he went, "That's a landfill." I said, "Who should I leave it to?" He went, "Don't worry about it. It'll all be in the landfill." So it's important on some level. It makes me feel terrible. And I mean, I've spent years collecting all this stuff. And I do play it. I play all of it. I still play records, and I like CDs, and I like electronic stuff too. The reality is I'm very, very grateful that we're putting things into electronic format, because then they'll be for the next generation. I will not be doing the podcast anymore, but somebody will be able to listen to maybe the interview I did with Lucia Papa, Renata Scotto, or whoever the person is that I interviewed, and they mean a lot to me. So it makes me happy to share. If it's one other person and it makes them happy, then it works, right?
And electronics allow it to be archived, for there to always be access to it. Yeah. Well, this was fun.
I enjoyed it thoroughly, too. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And thanks for thinking of the library when you needed space to do your little project.
It worked beautifully both ways. It's been wonderful. It really has. Thank you.
It's been a nice partnership. So, and I'll be there this fall. I'll make it a point.
Carmen will be waiting for you.
Yes, I'll make it a point.
Thank you, Catherine McDonald, Director of Lucius Beebe Memorial Library. You have been a delight today. I've really enjoyed doing this. If you're interested in other programs to do with the Opera Club or the podcast for Speaking Opera, which includes various photographs and so forth, there's a website, speakingopera.com. Facebook has a Facebook page, which is called Speaking Opera. Speaking Opera is on YouTube, and Speaking Opera is on Instagram. And if you ask me how I've done all of that, I would say not by myself. And the most important lesson, I'll leave it at this, and you're part of this, Catherine, without the help of many people in my life, none of this would be possible. And I definitely include the library and all of the people that have helped me with IT. I am not an IT wizard, but I'm getting better. I don't ask the same questions over and over again. And also WCIT, who have been absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun today. I've enjoyed it very much.
Me too. Thanks so much, Howard.
Speaking Opera focuses on documenting the career activities of currently active singers, composers, musicians, and authors in the field of operatic performance and scholarship, and specialists in the field of audio recording, as well as those who have retired fully or partially from performing and/or teaching. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.